In a world that prides itself on progress, compassion, and human rights, there exists a country that has become a living hell for its people. This nation, plagued by countless challenges, faces a grim reality where suffering and despair are everyday companions. What makes the situation even more disheartening is the lack of attention and concern from the global community. It seems that the world has turned a blind eye to the cries for help emanating from this forsaken land. The people of this country endure unimaginable hardships on a daily basis. The economy is in ruins, marked by rampant inflation, widespread poverty, and limited job opportunities. The majority of the population struggles to meet their basic needs, facing food shortages, inadequate healthcare, and a lack of essential services. Poverty and desperation have become the norm, trapping the citizens in a cycle of despair. Political instability further exacerbates the country's predicament. Corruption, power struggles, and weak governance have created a fractured society where the ruling elite prioritize their own interests over the well-being of the people. The lack of trust in the government and the constant fear of repression have left the citizens disillusioned and voiceless. Moreover, human rights abuses are pervasive in this country. Arbitrary arrests, torture, and suppression of freedom of speech are everyday occurrences. Dissent is met with brutal force, and those who dare to speak out against the oppressive regime face severe consequences. The basic rights and freedoms that many take for granted are stripped away, leaving the population living in a perpetual state of fear and oppression. Despite the harrowing reality faced by the people of this country, the international community remains indifferent. The world's attention is often directed towards more prominent conflicts or regions of strategic importance. The plight of this nation is overshadowed and forgotten, as the global community prioritizes its own geopolitical interests and concerns. In addition, media coverage of this country's struggles is often minimal or biased. News outlets tend to focus on sensational stories or conflicts that attract larger audiences, leaving little room for the stories of suffering and oppression from this nation to be heard. As a result, the world remains unaware of the daily struggles endured by its citizens. It is a tragic state of affairs when a country becomes a living hell, and the world turns a blind eye. The people of this nation deserve compassion, support, and intervention from the global community. It is imperative that we shed light on their plight, raise awareness, and demand action from international institutions and humanitarian organizations. Only then can we hope to alleviate the suffering and restore dignity to a country that has been neglected for far too long. The current situation in this country can only be described as a descent into hell. The people of this nation are grappling with numerous challenges that have pushed them to the brink of despair. Economic struggles, political instability, and widespread human rights abuses have created a dire environment where hope seems almost non-existent. The economy of this country is in a state of turmoil. Inflation rates are soaring, leaving the prices of basic commodities out of reach for the majority of the population. Poverty has become endemic, with families struggling to secure their next meal. The lack of job opportunities and investment exacerbates the economic crisis, trapping people in a cycle of poverty and deprivation. Political instability further compounds the country's woes. Corruption and power struggles have permeated every level of governance, leading to a breakdown of institutions and trust. The ruling elite prioritize their own interests over the welfare of the people, exacerbating the already dire situation. As a result, the citizens are left feeling disillusioned and betrayed by those who should be serving their best interests. Human rights abuses are rampant in this country. The suppression of freedom of speech, arbitrary arrests, and torture have become common occurrences. Dissent is met with brutal force, stifling any opposition or calls for change. The people live in constant fear of persecution and reprisals, stripped of their basic rights and freedoms. The violation of human rights is a daily reality for the citizens, further fueling their sense of despair. Despite the immense suffering endured by the people of this country, the world seems to turn a blind eye. International attention and support are lacking, leaving the citizens to bear the burden of their hardships alone. The global community appears indifferent, preoccupied with other conflicts or geopolitical interests. The cries for help from this nation go unanswered, compounding the sense of isolation and abandonment felt by its people. It is crucial that the world takes notice of the current situation in this country. The suffering, economic struggles, political instability, and human rights abuses cannot be ignored. It is a moral imperative for the international community to extend a helping hand, to provide assistance, and to advocate for change. The people of this country deserve support, compassion, and the opportunity to rebuild their lives and their nation. In conclusion, the current situation in this country is nothing short of a living hell. Economic challenges, political instability, and human rights abuses have created an environment of despair and hopelessness. It is high time for the world to acknowledge the plight of this nation and take decisive action. By doing so, we can restore dignity, hope, and a chance for a better future for the people who have suffered for far too long. Lack of international attention. The plight of this country is heartbreaking, as it faces unimaginable suffering and struggles. What makes the situation even more disheartening is the lack of international attention and support. It seems that the world has turned a blind eye to the cries for help coming from this nation, leaving its people to endure their hellish circumstances alone. One of the primary reasons for the lack of international attention is global indifference. The world is often preoccupied with its own challenges and conflicts, leaving little room to address the issues faced by this country. The suffering and desperation of its people are overshadowed by other geopolitical considerations and priorities. Furthermore, geostrategic considerations play a significant role in determining which crises receive international attention. If a country lacks strategic importance or valuable resources, it is more likely to be overlooked by the global community. Unfortunately, this country falls into that category, leaving its people feeling abandoned and forgotten. Media coverage bias also contributes to the lack of international attention. News outlets often prioritize sensational stories or conflicts that attract larger audiences. As a result, the stories of suffering and oppression from this country struggle to reach a global audience. The limited media coverage perpetuates the cycle of indifference and ignorance surrounding the country's struggles. The consequences of this lack of international attention are devastating for the country and its people. The absence of external assistance and support perpetuates the cycle of suffering and hampers efforts to rebuild and recover. The country's socio-economic situation deteriorates further, deepening poverty, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis, and amplifying the struggles faced by its citizens. It is essential for the world to realize that the challenges faced by this country have far-reaching implications. The lack of attention not only prolongs the suffering of its people but also contributes to broader regional instability and potential threats to global peace and security. Ignoring the cries for help has consequences beyond the borders of this nation. It is high time for the international community to recognize the urgency of the situation. Advocacy, activism, and awareness are crucial in raising the profile of this country's struggles. Humanitarian organizations and individuals can play a significant role in amplifying the voices of the oppressed, advocating for change, and pressuring international institutions to take action. In conclusion, the lack of international attention towards this country's plight is a painful reality. Global indifference, geostrategic considerations, and media coverage bias contribute to the world's apathy. However, it is not too late for the world to open its eyes and extend a helping hand. By breaking the cycle of indifference and advocating for change, we can show that compassion and solidarity can prevail even in the darkest corners of the world. Consequences for the country and its people. The devastating reality of this country being labeled as hell extends beyond mere words. The lack of international attention and support has dire consequences for both the country and its people. The ongoing struggles and suffering have left deep scars that will take generations to heal. One of the significant consequences is the socio-economic impact on the country. The absence of external assistance and investment exacerbates the existing economic challenges. Rampant inflation, limited job opportunities, and widespread poverty become deeply entrenched, perpetuating a cycle of despair. The lack of international aid hampers efforts to rebuild infrastructure, create sustainable livelihoods, and provide essential services to the people. The consequences for the people of this country are profound. The absence of international attention means that their cries for help go unheard, leaving them feeling abandoned and forgotten. Basic needs such as food, clean water, and healthcare become scarce commodities, pushing the most vulnerable into a state of desperation. The lack of access to education and opportunities stifles their potential and perpetuates generational poverty. Another consequence is the erosion of human rights and the rule of law. The absence of international pressure and scrutiny allows those in power to act with impunity. Human rights abuses, including arbitrary arrests, torture, and suppression of freedom of speech, become the norm. The citizens live in constant fear, unable to express their grievances or advocate for change without facing severe consequences. The lack of international attention further emboldens the oppressors and perpetuates the cycle of repression. Additionally, the absence of international support weakens the country's capacity to address environmental challenges and natural disasters. Climate change impacts, such as droughts, floods, and extreme weather events, can have devastating effects on vulnerable communities. Without international assistance and collaboration, the country struggles to adapt, mitigate the impact, and protect its citizens from the consequences of environmental crises. Ultimately, the lack of international attention not only prolongs the suffering of the people but also perpetuates a vicious cycle of instability and despair. The absence of external support hinders the country's ability to recover, rebuild, and create a better future. It sends a message to the citizens that the world has turned its back on their struggles and that their hopes for a brighter tomorrow are futile. In conclusion, the consequences of the world's indifference towards this country are far-reaching and deeply impactful. The socio-economic challenges, erosion of human rights, and vulnerability to environmental crises are just a few of the devastating consequences faced by the country and its people. It is crucial for the international community to acknowledge the severity of the situation, extend a helping hand, and advocate for change. Only through collective action and solidarity can we alleviate the suffering and restore hope to a country that has been neglected for far too long. Calls for action. The dire situation faced by this country, labeled as hell, demands urgent attention and action from the global community. The world cannot turn a blind eye to the suffering and struggles endured by its people. It is time to rally together, raise our voices, and advocate for change. Here are the key calls for action to address this humanitarian crisis. Increased international aid. The country urgently needs increased international aid to alleviate the economic challenges and provide immediate relief to the suffering population. Humanitarian organizations, governments, and individuals should step up their efforts to provide food, medical supplies, clean water, and other essential resources to those in need. Human rights advocacy. The violations of human rights in this country must be exposed and condemned. Human rights organizations, activists, and governments should exert pressure on the ruling elite to end arbitrary arrests, torture, and suppression of freedom of speech. International bodies such as the United Nations should closely monitor the situation and hold the perpetrators accountable. Media coverage and awareness. The media plays a crucial role in raising awareness and amplifying the voices of the oppressed. Journalists and media outlets should prioritize coverage of this country's struggles, shedding light on the realities faced by its people. Through increased media attention, the world can become more aware of the crisis and take action. Diplomatic engagement. Governments and international organizations should engage diplomatically with the ruling regime to push for political stability, transparency, and governance reforms. By encouraging dialogue and promoting democratic principles, there is a chance for positive change and improved conditions for the citizens. Support for sustainable development. Long-term solutions are crucial to breaking the cycle of despair. The international community should provide support for sustainable development initiatives, including education, job creation, and infrastructure development. By empowering the people and creating opportunities, we can help them rebuild their lives and regain hope for the future. Solidarity and advocacy. Individuals around the world can make a difference by standing in solidarity with the people of this country. Sharing information, raising awareness on social media platforms, and supporting relevant campaigns can help amplify their voices and exert pressure on decision-makers to take action. It is time for the world to recognize the urgency of the situation in this country and respond with compassion, empathy, and solidarity. We must not let the cries for help go unanswered. By joining forces and answering the calls for action, we can make a significant difference in alleviating the suffering, restoring hope, and rebuilding a nation that has been neglected for far too long. Together, let us show that the world cares and that no one should be left to endure hellish conditions alone. Conclusion. The dire situation faced by this country, coupled with the world's indifference, paints a grim picture. The people of this nation endure unimaginable suffering, while the global community remains largely unaware or apathetic to their plight. However, it is not too late to change the narrative and bring about much-needed support and change. The challenges faced by this country, from economic struggles to human rights abuses, require immediate attention. The lack of international aid exacerbates the already dire circumstances, leaving the citizens to endure a living hell. The consequences for the country and its people are far-reaching, hindering development, perpetuating poverty, and eroding basic human rights. To address this crisis, calls for action have emerged. Increased international aid is crucial to providing immediate relief and alleviating the economic hardships faced by the population. Human rights advocacy, media coverage, and diplomatic engagement can shed light on the situation, expose the violations, and push for reforms. Support for sustainable development initiatives offers hope for a brighter future. The world must not turn a blind eye to the suffering in this country. It is a moral imperative to extend compassion, empathy, and assistance to those who desperately need it. By joining forces and answering the calls for action, we can make a difference in the lives of the people who have endured hellish conditions for far too long. Solidarity and advocacy play a vital role in raising awareness and mobilizing support. Through media coverage, social media activism, and individual efforts, we can amplify the voices of the oppressed and demand change. Together, we can create a global movement that refuses to accept the status quo and works towards a brighter future for this country. In conclusion, the world must awaken to the plight of this country and take decisive action. The suffering endured by its people cannot be ignored any longer. By providing aid, advocating for human rights, and supporting sustainable development, we can help alleviate their hardships and restore hope. Let us show that the world does care, and together, we can bring an end to this country's hellish conditions.